So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Ahun Bharat to take the floor and launch the event.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marjorie, and welcome to everybody from wherever you are in the world. I'm broadcasting, as it were, from Cape Town, South Africa. In the background, you see the University of Cape Town, which I haven't been to because of COVID for the last year. Um, but I'm introducing the panel in my capacity as a board member of PEP, the Partnership for Economic Policy, and I think I'm extremely honored and grateful to actually be part of this discussion. The formal title, as you well know, for the session is Power in Proximity, for greater participation of local researchers in development policy debates. And in essence, for me, this is a really crucial topic, spanning the continuum, as I like to think of it, of how can local Southern researchers, broadly captured, publish in top tier journals on the one hand, right through to how can we improve the capacity, the skill set of Southern researchers who are attempting to grow and expand their academic and research profile. So in that continuum, it would seem to me there are a whole range of discussions, and I'm hoping today that we'll get to a point where we can think of collaborative, positive interventions that can actually improve across that continuum, from journal production in top tier journals right through to capacity of Southern researchers. We can find levers to actually improve the participation and involvement and profile of Southern researchers. So in bringing together this panel, we are grateful firstly for three funders, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Global Affairs Canada, and of course, International Development Research Center, IDRC of Canada. Our collaborators today, and I'll introduce very briefly the presenters, come from Southern Voice, the International Network for the Availability of Scientific Publications, INASP, the Center for Evidence-Based Healthcare, that's at Stellenbosch University in my own city, Cape Town, and finally, the Institute for Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. And our panelists, if I could just briefly introduce them before they will say a little bit more about themselves individually, are firstly Nasreen Jassani. And Nasreen is a senior researcher at the Center for Evidence-Based Healthcare at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And her work focuses on the nexus between health policy and systems research, and of course, innovations in evidence-based policy and practice. Our second panelist is Andrea Ordonez. And Andrea is director of Southern Voice, and her work focuses on fostering better knowledge systems to support sustainable development. Nathan Nunn is our third panelist, and Nathan is the Frederick E. Abb Professor of Economics at Harvard University, and he's also an NBER, National Bureau for Economic Research Faculty Research Fellow, a research fellow at BRED, and a faculty associate at Harvard's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. Our next panelist is Nisha Arunutelake, and she's the Director of Research and a Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies at Sri Lanka. Nisha is also a Research Fellow of PEP and a Research Associate of the Commitment to Equity, CEQ, Institute of Tulane University. Our last panelist, but by no means least, is of course Jane Mariara, who serves as the Executive Director, as many of you know, of PEP, and is a Professor of Economics at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. She's also a member of the Central Bank of Kenya's Monetary Policy Committee and of the German Institute of Global and Area Studies Advisory Board. But all of these excellent panelists will be moderated by John Young. And John is the Executive Director of INASP, which he joined in November 2018. He previously spent 17 years developing and leading the Research and Policy in Development program, RAPID, at the ODI, the Overseas Development Institute. Dr. Young has done research in over 20 developing countries and advised international organizations on a wide range of topics, from research policy linkages to government service reform and strategic communication. So please welcome the panelists and, of course, John to moderate us through this event. Thanks, John.
Very good. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Haroon. The only thing I would add to the bio there is that I'm a veterinarian by training and deeply intimidated by economists, and also that I've lived and worked in Sri Lanka, Kenya and Indonesia for about 15 years before joining ODI. So I have lived in the Global South and been doing research and trying to get the results of that research taken notice of. So I've actually been trying to do it as well as learning about it. And many thanks to PEP for inviting me to be part of this and INAS to be part of this really important event. It is a fantastically important issue. Our vision in INASP is that research and knowledge should be at the heart of development, and our mission is to strengthen the capacity of individuals and institutions to produce, share, and use research and knowledge in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And I wouldn't be there and I wouldn't be here if I didn't think this is a really important issue. But we've been working on this for about 30 years, me personally for about 30 years. And actually, we know quite a lot about what needs to be done in order to increase participation of local researchers in development policy debates. And we've tried many of them, but it's still a problem. So I think we have a fantastic opportunity in this event to really try and get under the skin of that issue and really try and identify how we can break this deadlock. And we have a fantastic panel of speakers who know far more about this than I do, and an audience who are in the thick of it. So I really hope that we'll be able to surface some really exciting things during the course of this event. So that's enough about me. I'm going to invite each of the panelists just to say a little bit more about themselves and why they think it's a really important issue. And you'll have seen the program. So then we go into a kind of panel discussion, and then there'll be time for Q&A from the floor after that. And then we'll split up into groups to look at some of these issues in more detail before reconvening at the end to try and identify the key takeaway points. So very good. Welcome to everybody and to my panel. Nisha, would you like to say a little bit more about yourself and why you think this is such an important issue?
Yeah, sure, John. So I work for a think tank in Sri Lanka whose main mandate is to create knowledge to guide medium to long-term policy. So as such, I worked with both as a researcher developing policy as well as a practitioner, helping to convert policy into practice. There is already some recognition in the literature that local researchers are important for providing the policy context and interpreting research results. But I also see local researchers have power in proximity because local researchers know who the policymakers are, what their policy interests are, when policy windows arise, and how to package research to suit different policy agendas. In this respect, I think there is value in nurturing the power of the local researchers. I hope to discuss this further in this dialogue. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Nisha. Jane, you're next.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. First, just to say that I'm very excited to be hosting this event. It's always our greatest pride at PEP to have our signature event almost every June of each year. Why I would say that this is a very important issue is I would say it's precisely the reason why PEP is in existence. For the last almost 20 years, what PEP has been doing is actually looking for different ways of promoting the greater participation of local researchers in development policy debates. And as you know, in PEP, we insist that really we must have locally driven evidence. And how can this be unless we empower the local researchers? So I'll be happy to be discussing this later and to talk about maybe some of the barriers that we really have to tackle as PEP Thank you, John.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jane. And Nathan, I'll go to you next.
Great. So it's fantastic to be here. So my name is Nathan Nunn. I'm a professor of economics, and I was actually editor of the Journal of Development Economics for 7 years, and currently editor of the Quarterly Journal of Economics. And so there's lots of reasons that that I think this is an important issue. But from my perspective, I guess one thing I'll highlight is that I think our research could be so much better. And this is why I mentioned the editorships, and is that the research in general could be so much better if we include Southern researchers. I think it's a little biased, or a lot biased currently, on the quantitative side in generalizations, and is missing context, and so that's the other thing I would say is just I think we can do a lot better, in addition to equity concerns and all those sorts of issues.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Nathan. And you might have heard me snort in the middle of your introduction. That wasn't a jovial snort. It was a snort of fear, because you've been involved in so many sort of global and national economics things. So next, Andrea.
Hi, John, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. Well, I think that the official thing I should say is that this is really important, because this is the mission of our network. Southern Voice is a network of 51 think tanks across the Global South, working to position scholars in international and global debates. But really, over these years, it has become much more personal, getting to know so many great researchers and getting to read such interesting research across the Global South. I feel like the world is missing out by not reading it and by not engaging with these great colleagues that I've come to meet and appreciate across the Global South. So I think that's why it's important, because the people behind the research and the institutions are really putting their best effort, and they're doing really good work.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Andrea. And Nazreen.
Hello, everyone. Oh, it's bright sun right here right now, but very cold in Johannesburg. Thank you for the introduction, John. I'm at the Center for Evidence-Based Healthcare at Stellenbosch University, and also spent some of my time as faculty at Johns Hopkins University in the US. So I straddle a northern research organization and a southern research organization, which in some ways I feel provides me with very unique perspectives on how we advocate for Southern voice. I'm a Kenyan that's grown up in the South, but educated in the North, and feel like in many ways this is an important topic professionally, but also personally in terms of my obligation to the South. So I'm glad to be a part of this. Thanks so much, John.
Very good. Thank you all very much indeed. And we're ahead of time, which is brilliant. So that gives us a bit more time for the discussion and questions and answers afterwards. So we've actually divided this into two parts. One part is really looking at the problem. Why is this a problem? The context and the current situation, which we're facing, particularly for local researchers and getting greater exposure in development policy debates. So first part, problem, and then the second part is about possible solutions. And so we'll work through, and we've got some pre-prepared questions, which I'm going to fire at different members of the panel, and you will have a chance to ask questions and contribute at the end. So let's start with you, Nisha. You're in a think tank in Sri Lanka. You're in the thick of it, the national policy debate. What is the process for and the extent to which local researchers and foreign experts contribute to development policy discussions, particularly at national level?
So it really varies widely depending on the political environment, the nature of donor engagement, local capacity, and the socioeconomic environment. So let me explain. The opportunity for policy discussion change from government to government. If I take Sri Lanka, for example, during the last regime, they relied a lot on foreign experts. Actually, the Prime Minister's office had a little room for experts from Harvard University. But on the other hand, the current government, they rely totally on local experts. So really, it really depends. The opportunities for policy discussion also depend on the nature of donor assistance. So when technical assistance is given with aid, the government is compelled to listen to the foreign experts. For example, during the last regime, we got aid from IMF. There was a standby arrangement. So there were policy discussions with a range of local stakeholders when IMF missions came to Sri Lanka. And the opportunity for policy discussion also depends on the timing of the policy reports. So for example, in 2014, there were two very well-researched reports that came out, World Bank Country Diagnostic Report and the 2014 UNDP National Human Development Report. But soon after that, in 2015, there was a government change. So the findings of the reports were, although disseminated, they didn't go into any deep policy discussions. So they were not well in it didn't lead to policy influence that much. The environment for discussion also changed with the socioeconomic conditions. For example, in 2019, when the Easter Sunday bomb attacks happened in Sri Lanka and the current COVID-19 pandemic, it has changed a lot. And also it depends on the maturity of the research field. For example, there's a lot more discussion in Sri Lanka on poverty and inequality than on future of work and how we should address that. So yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Anisha. Lots of factors there at national level: politics, the interference of donors is what I've written down here, timing, and the maturity of the field. Nathan, moving on to you, because you've been looking at these issues, but at a rather different level. So what would your answer to that question be? What's the process for extent to which local researchers and foreign experts contribute to development policy discussions, but particularly at regional or global levels?
Yeah. So I'll, in my answer, just because of my background, I'll focus on the academic side more than the policy, because I haven't. And then, so if I'm just to characterize the current situation within the academic world and the research world, I think, this is not new to everyone, but there's a bias towards the United States for historical reasons. And so even away from Europe, but particularly away from the global South. So anything that's studied that's relevant to the US is inherently of more interest to mainstream researchers. Networks are important, and so then that has implications for then how integrated scholars are outside of the United States and in the global South. And there's, as I mentioned, because of the methods we use, there's a tendency for overgeneralization. So often I see that research that's done, the question may have been answered for Bolivia, and then somebody else comes along and says, well, what's the evidence for Kenya, for example? And then evaluators say, oh, we already know the answer because there was a quantitative study done for Bolivia. And so there's, again, a tendency to lump together all countries in the global South and give them about as much importance as the United States, for example. And then the consequence is the exclusion of scholars from the global South that I think, as I mentioned, have a lot to offer to our body of knowledge as a profession. And so if I'm to characterize kind of the current setting from the academic perspective, that's kind of how I would describe it.
Very good. Thank you very much, Nathan. So bias towards the US networks and a tendency to sort of localize from results elsewhere, which may not be at all relevant in the country they're trying to localize them. Nazreen, you've been studying this much more than certainly I have, and you've been working both at the local level and at the national level. Are there historical or political economy reasons for this? Why have these things happened, as Nisha and Nathan has explained?
Thanks, John. And I think, Nathan, I'm going to springboard from some of what you said. I think there are many explanations, some historical, some political, but some also structural. And I think many of these, at least in the South and low and middle income countries, stem from when you talk about policy processes, they stem from governance structures that not only mirrored colonial processes, but also treated colonial structures or Western structures as preferential. So for example, the introduction of Western political structures and processes resulted in the sidelining of indigenous or local knowledge and practices, not only of governance, but also for science. And this also introduces, I think, deeply entrenched power asymmetries between the North and the South, as Nisha was explaining, but also within the South, between the elite institutes of higher education and those less well known. And we see that here in South Africa as well, to the detriment of phenomenal researchers in other universities, but perhaps not as elite. And I'll borrow an idea from Drs. Riedpath and Alote, who provided the analogy of trickle-down science, similar to that of trickle-down economics in some ways. And they note that it was assumed that the way to improve Southern discourse is to concentrate intellectual resources and opportunities in the global North, with the assumption that it will trickle down to the less developed South. And so if that's the case, and the brightest minds from the South pursue opportunities in the North, where all the support structures are concentrated. So this comes back to the structural issues, and that includes funding, research facilities, mentors, better pay, better career progression, and even prestige. And so the global South in many ways, and I know I'm generalizing, and this isn't fair to generalize, but given the topic of today's conference, the global South therefore continues to struggle, I think, to retain bright minds, and the global North therefore continues to dominate the world stage in these kind of debates. And so, you know, when it comes to processes to contribute to policy decisions, it's then these same Northern voices that are respected or requested or even considered. And local contextual knowledge, therefore, even though it's valued and it's needed, and I think that recognition is increasing, it's the opportunity then, therefore, sometimes for diaspora from the South, rather than actually locally embedded researchers, to take a seat at the table. And then even in those debates, elitism trickles in. So which university do you have your degree from, whether you're Northern educated. So an example is in 1915, when the Peking Union Medical College was founded, it was referred to as the Johns Hopkins of China. And I wonder someday if we'll have a Northern institution perhaps boast that it's the Peking University of the USA or the UK or Germany. And so I think it would be remiss not to mention in some ways that colonialism and resulting attitudes from the past have created structures that continue to entrench some perception of less sufficient capacity when it comes to the global South.
Very good. Thank you very much, Nasreen. I missed the name of the guy who invented this trickle-down science idea. What was his name?
So Dr. Riedpath and Dr. Pascal Alote, they've written a really nice piece on this, and I'd be happy to share the link.
Very good. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Whoever came up with the concept, but that was the best way to mobilize Southern research knowledge. It needs to be on my hit list. Jane, Andrea, do you want to add anything to this, focusing on the problem, really? Why is it difficult for local researchers to engage in these debates? Do you have anything to add?
Thank you, John. I add a little bit to what Nathan said, that he focused more on the academic side of things, and I wanted to bring up a little reflection on the policy side, global policy side. And I think bringing in some of the work that Diane Stone has produced on this aspect. She talks a lot about how there is this identity of a transnational policy professional, and these are kind of like the experts that you would imagine that are, because of the nature of their location many times, very close to these spaces. So for example, a researcher in Columbia or NYU may feel like very connected and easily access, that can easily access the UN system and UN agencies. And so there's this notion of these transnational policy professionals that include certain researchers, and these ones are usually based in the global North and in the hubs of global policy debates. And I think it's also a bit of an identity for the Global South researchers that we don't see ourselves as part of that community of transnational policy professionals. And these transnational policy professionals feel like, you know, even if you are from the UK, you can talk to an expert from Kenya about a policy proposal or an issue within the UN system. And I think many of the researchers in the Global South, we still feel like our natural audience is our national level, our national civil servants within those global systems, and not necessarily all of them as those that have this identity as transnational professionals would have. So I think just wanted to add that bit for the policy side.
Yeah, very good. Transnational policy professionals, a good thing. The problem is most of them are northern. We need to have more southern transnational policy professionals. Andrea, do you want to add anything at this point?
Okay, that was Andrea, so it's me now.
Sorry.
Okay, all right, thank you. Maybe just to agree with my colleagues and the important issues that have been brought out by Nisha and Nasrin. First, the North-South, and now also increasing South-South disparities in terms of opportunities and contribution. Of course, it's more nuanced in research, but as Andrea is saying, even in policy, you find that actually there's dominance of contribution to development policy in the South by Northern experts, at a bit sometimes of some selected Southerners in the South. But I think the beauty is that when we look at the contribution to development policy discussions, actually maybe at the national level, I would say that the game is changing a bit, because if you go down to these countries, and for instance, you look at countries that have embraced decentralization and devolved governments, then you find that it's actually local researchers, local policy experts that are really trying to inform development policy at the ground. There's still the role of the northerner, but more at the national level, but maybe not at the county governments. And finally, just to note that, again, this is where institutions such as PEP and others are really trying very hard to ensure that we can have local policy makers, local researchers trained on evidence-informed policy-making processes so that they can contribute to the design of development policy at the national and at the local levels. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jane. And we're starting to edge into the territory of the next set of contributions, I think, about possible solutions there. So really good overview of the challenge, politics, power. Good. Nasrin talked a lot about power, and also culture. I liked your story about the John Hopkins of China. And just, I think that might be changing actually, not necessarily with John Hopkins, but I was talking to a friend of mine who's very much involved with BRAC International, who are trying to establish themselves as a global NGO. And I think the way in which they challenge the existing very northern dominated NGO culture might be an interesting lesson for academia to follow. And BRAC University, of course, is a fantastic university in Bangladesh. Very good. So that's the problem. Let's go on and look at some of the possible solutions. And let's start. Well, actually, we'll start again with you, Jane. Particularly, as you've already talked about, one of the main roles of PEP is to build the capacity of local researchers. Would you like to say a little bit more about that as a solution to this challenge?
Okay. Thank you. So as I've said, yes, there's a problem. We have the North-South disparities. We have the South-South disparities. But I think I would still maintain that there is actually a lot of technical capacity in the South And this is where the contribution of institutions has come in. So it's not basically the lack of technical capacity to inform, but maybe it's the political economy issues that Nasrin has actually brought out. And also because it's believed that maybe the local researchers will not have the expertise to inform local research, local local research or local development policy, and therefore you find that institutions, sometimes even governments, want to run either to the north or to the people who are in the diaspora. But what then needs to be done is to ensure that the capacity that we have here can actually be enhanced. But even when we try that as institutions, we find that there are quite a lot of barriers that actually hinder this. And just to mention maybe 3 main barriers. One is what we call the reputational barriers, where, as I've mentioned, and as has been mentioned by the others, if you think about multilaterals, bilaterals, national governments, they are often biased in favor of the foreigners or foreign experts, even when they know that they actually have the local capacity. And as I've said, PEP, maybe if you think about GDN, African Economic Research Consortium, and others are really trying to change this narrative so that we can have contribution by the local experts. 2, it's a question of resources, and this one we cannot overemphasize. We know that the Southern policy researchers often have limited access to name it, whether it's databases, whether it's software, whether it's technology, whether it's documentation, whether it's funding. We really have inequities that have to be worked on if they are going to make a significant contribution. And finally, I would talk about maybe the time for research, for scientific contribution. First, because the systems at home do not necessarily work. There are a lot of bottlenecks that they have to deal with, leave alone maybe very heavy teaching and administrative burdens that give them very little time to participate in the policy, in good policy research. And as I've mentioned, maybe PEP and other institutions are working very hard to change this narrative. Thank you, John.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jane. I think we'll pick up on some of those also with some of the other panelists, particularly this issue about reputation and being in the right sorts of networks, and maybe this idea about a transnational quality professional. How can we get more of those? Andrea, what's the trick?
Well, indeed, I think that networking is part of the ingredients that we need to work on to enhance the role of local researchers at the different levels. And building on Jane's comment on reputation, I think it definitely plays a role with reputation, because we have to think that the policymakers that we're working on at different levels precisely want to reach out to experts because they don't have, it's not within their role to produce all this knowledge and to do all the due diligence to make sure that the evidence is correct and that the results are valid and so on. I think that being part of networks that can, provide reputation, provide support are one of the key mechanisms to enhance participation of local researchers. But also, and this is to add to Nathan's previous comment on how we produce research right now, and how we have evidence of one country and then we're wondering if it's valid or if it's not within another context. I think that's also another space where networks become very useful. And I think that COVID-19 is being a really interesting experiment in that sense, because we have a common issue that is handled very differently, and that allows us to learn across different contexts. And we can do this through networks, through talking to colleagues about the things that we're working on and learning from each other. And in that way, reaching these more comprehensive and valid conclusions across different contexts, but that take into consideration the expertise and the knowledge in each particular context. So I think networks can play both these roles at providing reputation, support, validity to the research, but also as a tool to produce research and to make sure that that it's valid across different contexts as well.
Very good. Thank you very much, Andrea. And Jane mentioned two other resources, both financial and non-financial, and I wondered whether Anisha, you might want to say a bit more about the right kind of funding to build local capacity.
Yeah, I like to think about funding in two different interfaces. The funding for research to policy interface and funding for policy to practice interface. So in the research to policy interface, there is need to improve resources, as Jane was talking about, local researchers to conduct research according to the national priorities. So as we experience at IPS, most of the time when we identify an urgent research need, we struggle to find resources to conduct the research, because we are at the moment doing a survey on researchers in the global south, and what we find is a lot of the low and middle income country governments do not invest in research, and which means the local researchers have to depend on foreign aid, but then those come with their own agendas, so they don't have the space to do the research that is needed that they identify. And also there is need for training local researchers on new research issues, because some of them, like say climate change and all of that. Yeah. And in the policy to practice interface, I think there is a lot of still, I think in this discussion, I hear there is a lot of talk about research quality, but I really want to emphasize the importance of providing funding for communicating research. Funding for development policy research should include resources for developing research communication. Projects pay too much attention to ensure scientific rigor of projects, but not enough on communicating the research results. So if you want to influence policy, the communications is really important. So for that, you need to have different kinds of tools, training, communication for different audiences, such for funding for those kind of things. And funding for influencing policy in practice also should be demand driven. As I have been telling throughout, it is the policy discussion should happen when you can influence the policy. Because if it happens at the end of a research project, if no one is listening, it will not stick. You have to be strategic about it. It should be before, when the elections are happening, or when something, or before budgets, or so only the local researchers would know, and it should be properly targeted to communicate to the policy interest of the politicians, if you really want to influence policy. And lastly, I think funding is also needed for improve the availability of data and for developing tools to use imperfect data for conducting research. I can say that I can't still do the type of research I did when I was an undergraduate at Duke University 20 years ago in Sri Lanka, because there is no data. Yeah. There's no data after 20 years. So yeah, so really need to have tools to use imperfect data to conduct research, because there's value in doing research using available data.
Very, very good. Thank you very much. So funding for a whole range of things as well as the research itself. Nathan, do you want to respond a bit to the issue about sort of non-financial resources?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about non-financial stuff and what can be done. And I think a key here is to make connections between researchers in the North and the South, as we've been talking about, and those connections are missing and the integration is missing. So how do you do it? So I think there's discussions like this, talking about it, different initiatives. It's going to be multi-pronged. There's not one policy that's going to do it, but there's going to be a vast majority of the profession or scholars in the North that don't care about these issues. There will be some that do care inherently. So then how do you change, given that there's this group of scholars? And what I would say is scholars and individuals respond to incentives. So the question, I think part of it is just questioning or thinking about, if you see a conference and it's about economic development or about development in Africa, and there's no panelists or no presenters from the continent, we should, call the organizers out. And that's being done more and more on all aspects of diversity, race, gender, but also I think representation globally is super important. If you see a paper, and this is also as an editor or as referees or anytime we're evaluating research, you see a paper, it's about something, just as an example, female empowerment in Ghana, for example, and there's no scholar from the country, maybe even no female scholar. Ask the authors what's going on. And if they say, oh, well, we consulted a lot of local individuals and we work closely, then ask, well, why aren't they a co-author on the paper, right? And I think the more we do this, and the more that's viewed as important in assessing the quality of research, then people are going to respond. Then they're going to involve local scholars if the incentives are there. And I think that shift is occurring, particularly with an increased importance in fields like behavioral economics, which inherently are about the local context in a setting and things that are harder to quantify. But I think the more we do that, and that's, the responsibility is on scholars in the North, primarily to call each other out in those settings. But I think a lot of it's going to have to go through this in a shift in mindset about what good research is.
Really important and a good point to hand over to the other issue, which has come up quite a lot, which is this sort of mindsets of northern organizations that fund and do research, northern researchers, etc., which has been touched upon a few times. Nazreen, I wondered if you'd like to talk a bit about what can be done to try and overcome those sorts of attitudes and encourage people to recognize the value of local knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nathan touched on something that I really thought was really important about the commitment at the organization as well as the individual level to be calling things out. And I think as individuals, we have the power to encourage, like at conferences, that all panels have good representation and call out the ones that, just like we've done for, hashtag no manels. And we should refuse to be on panels that only represent the Northern voice for global issues. I'm not sure what the equivalent hashtag would be, but I think it helps to have a unified movement. And we've seen that over and over again throughout the last few years. So I think that's really helpful. And the North, and I know I'm generalizing here, but the North needs to not just be a passive supporter of Southern voice, but an active advocate of Southern colleagues. And so it comes back to what could be the role of Northern funders. And I used to work for IDRC, and I know we've got colleagues from IDRC here, but also other funding organizations that are based in the North that make a deliberate effort of using their convening power, but also their financial power to bring Southern researchers to global policy debates and discussions, but also academic debates and discussions. And I think more of that needs to be recognized, supported, and encouraged. And together with that comes not just the funding of research, but of support for the organizations doing research, because there are so many other organizational challenges for doing good research in terms of, access to data, access to libraries, ability to fund communications of research, to engage with decision makers. And I think we're making a bit of an assumption that all researchers should and want to be engaged in policy debates. But I think many researchers in the institutions here in low and middle income countries are actually embedded in the communities where they do their research. So they don't not only know the communities well, but they consider themselves academic practitioners. And given their engagement at the coalface of the phenomena they seek to study, it renders them perhaps less connected as we talk about networks, but also perhaps less concerned about engaging in policy debates, but more interested in making change in terms of practice, which they might feel has more impact on the ground. And so this is considered perhaps personal choice, but another reason for some of the exclusion of local researchers in policy debates. I also think that another form of Northern sensitization or Northern appreciation of the knowledge from the South would be to seek out the lessons from the South. I mean, for instance, at least in the field of public health, which is where I'm embedded, there's so much to learn about the role of community health workers if we seek to achieve universal health care, and also if we seek to treat populations in their own communities. And that's something that you mentioned BRAC has done extremely well, but in Ethiopia, they've done extremely well as well in terms of taking healthcare to populations. And we've seen with COVID how much of a struggle that's been in countries like the US that do have low resource settings. So I think the North has much to learn from the South and how to provide services in low resource settings, whether it's health services, banking services, social protection services. There is constrained infrastructure in all of these countries. And I think that in the South, we have tried to figure out a way to address these. And there might be something to also learn that could be translated in the opposite direction. I'll stop there. I think I've probably run out of my time, John.
Very good. Thanks a lot for that. And thanks a lot to everybody. I think there's some really, really good ideas from members of the panel, and we'll have time in the breakout rooms to explore them in more detail. And clearly there's no single solution that will work anywhere, actually. It needs to be a combination of solutions and a different set of solutions, I think, in each context. But there seem to be some generic high-level issues emerging. Each country needs to have its own vibrant knowledge ecosystem. And for that to work and to be sustainable, national research organizations need to receive sufficient national funding and also a reasonable share of international development funding. Women and men should be equally able to pursue academic careers. Decision makers need to make use of all of the evidence which is available when they're looking at challenges. We in INAS, we call that an equitable knowledge ecosystem. And the best attempt I've seen to try and do that anywhere was the Indonesian Knowledge Sector Initiative, which I know people in the audience were also involved in. It aimed to empower researchers, policymakers and intermediaries to help Indonesia find solutions to its own socioeconomic challenges. Sadly, that program was a victim of the merger between AusAid and DFAT and the consequent huge shift in Australian development policy towards diplomacy and trade. And it's really now turned into a program which is much more about supporting Australian universities to do research in Indonesia than strengthening Indonesia's own knowledge ecosystems. And you will have observed we're doing exactly the same now in the UK. Huge policy confusion in the newly merged Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, massive cuts in development research funding, even to ongoing projects, and especially projects seeking to build the kind of equitable partnerships we have discussed quite a lot this morning. So I agree with other members of the panel. The real problem is the lack of commitment to build equitable knowledge ecosystems. And what we need to do, I think, is generate the evidence necessary to really persuade politicians in the global north and in the global south to invest in them. So very good. Thank you very much, other panelists. We've got quite a lot of questions from the floor. Let me see if I can, some of them are quite general and just extending the question of the whole conference really is what can we do? There's an interesting one from Francisco Urbino. How has the debate changed since the work of Diane Stone and in 2019, 98-99 World Development Report on Knowledge for Development? I think that's the kind of point I started out in the beginning, is why we've known about this 30 years. Why isn't it changing? What is the major obstacle to this? Does anybody on the panel want to have a go at that one? I can't see if anyone. Oh, Andrea, are you volunteering?
I'll attempt, John.
Go for it.
So, well, I think that the political systems in a way also reflect what's going on in society. And I think that we still live in a world where for all sorts of knowledge, and not only scientific knowledge, but our everyday knowledge, is very driven by the global north and what's happening in the global north. And this is clearly the case, now that we could have observed with COVID as an example. So we were all following what was happening in the UK, but should the news and everybody been following more what was happening in Senegal? That they were doing a much more interesting follow-up of what was of the pandemic there. So I think it's going to be very difficult to change the political system and who the politicians listen to if we all are still listening more to what is happening in the global north. And that's why at the beginning I brought up this personal thing, because I think for all of us as a community, it's a matter of who we are also reading, who we are also citing, and in that practice do the changes that we've been discussing as a panel, and those take time. So I think that's partially why the 30 years have flown without much change. But that's kind of like a bit of the cultural changes that we should, I think, be promoting more as we've been discussing.
Very good, thanks, Andrea. Anybody else on the panel want to have a go at that one? Nathan, you've turned your camera on. Go for it.
Yeah, so I guess just one thing I'll mention, which has happened since then, and I think it's moving us, a pressure that's moving us in the wrong direction, is some innovations in methods, and particularly the RCT revolution, randomized control trials, which was the 3 scholars recently won the Nobel Prize for. And the reason there is, I think that revolution, that's come to dominate development economic research, really focuses on methods and randomization of interventions, and it's very costly. So I think the equilibrium, or what we've moved to, is you can have a researcher in the north sitting in their office in New York, for example, coming up with ideas like, how do we fix the south? And then let's randomize that. And then we'll have a team on the ground implement it. And then the data will be sent back to my office. I never need to leave New York. And then we have a super clean causal estimate. And that doesn't work. Let me brainstorm and think of something else. And so there's a few reasons. One is the whole method and the emphasis on quantification is biased towards the north, but also the money that's involved. Often these projects are millions and millions of dollars, and we've talked about this. And it's the north that's connected with the donors, and donors have maybe more faith in scholars, big name scholars that they've heard of in the north. And so that's come to dominate development economic research. Before, it was more on the ground contextual work, some applied theory, some more descriptive stuff. And now it's really this randomization, and you need this giant machinery that I think has bias towards people in the north. And so I think that's one thing that's happened in the last 20 years.
Absolutely, and somewhere there's a figure which I've quoted several times, that only 5% of development interventions can actually be assessed using an RCT. So not only are they obsessed with RCTs, that they're entirely useless for most of the development interventions. I see all of the panel have turned on their cameras. Does that mean you all want to respond to this question, or should we move on to another question? Because there is another question which picks up on that from Vathana Roth. How can funding agencies help increase the involvement of local researchers in research and policy, particularly North-South collaboration? So would one of you, who is obviously keen to respond to the sort of higher level question, shape it to answer that question at the same time? I'll look to see who turns the microphone off first and assume, oh, Nisha, are you going to talk about that? You've turned your microphone off again. Who's going to talk about that? Nobody wants to talk about donors?
I can take a shot at it. Can you repeat the question again?
How can funding agencies help increase the involvement of local researchers in research and policy, particularly North-South collaboration?
So I'd love to hear from others, and I know we have some funders here as well. I think funders in some ways hold a unique intermediary or brokering role between the research and policy community. I think the fact that they come with prestige, power, and also money gives them a voice at some of these discussions and debates. And I think they can play a really important role as conveners for these kind of engagements, but I think they can also serve as champions for the research that they are funding, to make sure that if in some ways it comes back to the communication or the knowledge translation role, that if you're in you have an opportunity to celebrate some research results from the South, results of research you fund or are familiar with, and you have a space at a Global North table or at some kind of dialogue, then to take that opportunity to celebrate your Southern researchers who don't have a chance to be at that table. So I think they hold a lot of power. And I think it's a matter of leveraging that power in a way that's constructive, productive, celebratory, but also provides opportunity then for follow-up with those whose work is making that kind of difference. And I'm sure there's other ideas, so I'll hand over the mic to others.
And there are some really good donors that do that. IDRC, of course, leaps to mind. And I mentioned a little bit earlier on about the tragedy of what's happening to development research funding in the UK, massive cuts, particularly for projects funded as part of the Global Challenges Research Fund. And that was deliberately set up to try and build partnerships and build networks between the North and the South. So I think there's a lot that donors can do. Does anybody else want to talk about
yeah,
donors?
if I can add to that, John. Sorry. I really think this UNDP, the process that the model they use for developing the National Human Development Report, I really like that. I think because they really get the local, they provide the guidance, but get the local researchers to conceptualize the research question, have a lot of consultations. So really, you identify research questions that are important for the country, and then there is validity in that. But I think they could also improve in terms of communicating the research, but up to developing policy, they do a really good job.
But all of the research calls I've seen from UNDP are very short term. They expect results very quickly, usually because it's coming to the end of the year and they've got some spare money to spend. So very good in parts, I would say. There's another interesting question. If we move on from donors, and I know Jane, you had your hand up, so maybe you can answer the next question. It's from Claude Sinzogan. Apologies if I've mispronounced the name. What do you think about the low interaction between government departments and academic research centers in Africa?
Okay, thank you, John. I'll attempt to answer that, though I really wanted just to say that agreeing with Nasreen and Nisha, fathers have a big role to play. And I was going to tell Roth just supporting mentorship, because from our fathers, PEP has a very intensive capacity building model where actually we do use also Northern researchers to mentor Southern researchers. And that is actually contributed by the donors. But coming to Claude's question, I think he's asking about, okay, just ask the question again so that I'm sure that I get it correctly.
The question is, what do you think about the low interaction between government departments and academic research centers in Africa?
Okay, thank you. This is definitely what Nasreen was talking about earlier when she started this debate. And what we said is that governments, even in Africa, in some cases are still relying on Northern development policy experts to inform local development policy. And this is where we need to move from to ensure that local experts can actually inform local development policy. We again mentioned that a bit, and Claude is actually one of our policy outreach committee members in PEP, and he knows that what we are trying to do is trying to get researchers to work very intensively with.
We've lost your voice, Jane. I think we might have temporarily lost Jane. Jane.
Can I jump in while we wait for Jane?
Yes,
would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll lower my hand. I think it's a really interesting question, and I don't think that it's necessarily fair that that's happening across Africa. And I think once again, the COVID pandemic has shown us in many ways the reliance of governments on local academic institutions. We've seen a lot of engagement here in South Africa, at least between universities, academics across the country, engaging with government on trying to provide the right evidence to inform decision-making and policies, and not just health policies, but anything to, across from transport policies to education policies. And I think there has been that recognition and reliance on academia to be able to work closely with government. I think there's been an adjustment and needed to be some kind of understanding of how the policy process works when it's such rapid information that's needed, and vice versa, for government to understand the academic ecosystem or the research ecosystem. But it's not just here in South Africa. We've got phenomenal organizations in Kenya and in Malawi and in Tunisia that are very well embedded in terms of trying to work with their governments to inform locally relevant decision-making that's culturally appropriate as well. So it's probably not as widespread as we'd like to see, or it's not as commonplace as we'd like to see, but I would hesitate to say that that's the case across the continent. And I do think that we're seeing some change.
Very good. And unfortunately, it looks like we've lost Jane. But there's an interesting question here from Edgar Rodriguez. He says, is there a dearth of evidence about research systems? Developing countries do not spend on local or national social research. International agencies do not appear to invest enough to know how social research systems are faring in the global south. I mean, is that something that we ought to do more about, to actually sort of characterize the social research systems in the global south and make others more aware of it, so that they see that there's strength there that can be drawn on? Who would like to have
Yeah, I would like to have a go at this. I think part of the reason is that there is simply no interest in the academia in the global south in getting engaged in policy research, because they are also going after the publications. So they're just too busy, limited resources, spending all their, because I think that is how they are measured, because the quality of their expertise is measured by the publications. So obviously they go after that. So I think we need to have other systems, other ways of measuring quality. I think IDRC is already working on this. I really like this new methodology. They've come up with this RQ Plus, where they look at the policy influence and impact also to measure quality, but still that is not happening. So there is lack of interest on the part of the politicians, and also lack of interest on the part of the researchers, because they are not rewarded for getting engaged in policy discussions.
So it's not a problem of not knowing the capacity is there. It's actually they're just not interested in using that kind of stuff.
Actually, we found out that survey that I was talking about. That's what we are finding, that it's just
Okay, very good. Here's another provocative question from Stephen Yo, unsurprisingly, and actually, Andrea, you might want to answer this. The importance of networks has been mentioned frequently by panelists. It's surprising there do not seem to be more networks in the south, or more networks that bridge the north and the south. Are there such networks out there somewhere? Do we just not hear enough about them?
Well, I was replying in the chat to Stephen that one thing is that I see networks like constellations, right? That are kind of like constantly moving pieces of actors coming together. And a lot of times these are just like project-based networks that come to an existence during a period of time, and then they kind of like they cease to exist. And so that I think that happens a lot. And maybe it's not terribly bad that that happens, because they serve a specific purpose. But I have to say, like working with a network, it's a lot of effort and investment from every side to keep a network going. So it's not surprising in that sense. And the other thing is that also maybe because of the colonial history and the division of how regions have been thought through, it's very uncommon for us to work across the global South. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities, but it'll take time to learn each other context, to find colleagues and create those networks. And that's where that's difficult to change. And I think that's one of the other things that that funders can do, is they can change the who's in charge of running these projects and who's receiving the funding. All right, because if it's the organizations in the South deciding who to partner, the networks may look very differently to what they look like when a project is run by an organization in the global North.
Yeah, very good. And there's some really interesting responses to that question coming up in the chat column, which I'm not going to repeat. But Louise Shaxson, a colleague of mine, used to say the problem is donors only want to fund the boxes. They don't want to fund the lines between the boxes. They're interested in specific pieces of research on questions they're interested in. They're not interested in how that knowledge is shared. And so I think that is part of the problem. There's a very interesting question here from Howard White. What about academic brain drain? Mexican government makes quite substantial payments to researchers to stay in Mexico. Is that an issue elsewhere? Should other governments be doing that? Who wants to have a go at that? Nathan, good.
Yep, great. Yeah, I think that's a great issue. And I'm uncertain about my answer, but I guess coming from Canada, where that's a big issue, is the brain drain in general from Canadians going to the US. The way I view it is we want to make more connections. The more connections, the better. So if you're worried about brain drain, to some extent, you're removing a connection between your country and then a foreign country. So there's a number of examples. So like a prime example for me is my co-author, Leonard Wanchikon, who is from Benin. And then he went to Canada and then the United States and got a PhD. So you might be worried about brain drain in the sense that he continued to work he's now at Princeton University as a professor, continued to work there. But what he did is he actually went back to Benin, first set up a college, and now has set up a university, the African School of Economics. And basically, I think, and that's only possible because of his connections and the funding through Princeton and through the organizations. And so it's because he's in the North, basically, he's able to do that. So in the end, if we would have tried to prevent him from being in the North permanently, I think you're losing out on a lot of potential benefits. So brain drain, you kind of have the idea of, people from the Southern countries, they leave and then never look back. But I think they'll leave, make connections with the North, and then try and help out and build connections back in the country that they were born in. So to me, I'm less worried about the brain drain than the typical story that you hear.
And maybe this is part of the process of building Southern transnational policy professionals, which I think Andrea talked about earlier on. Jane, you're back. We lost you for a while.
Yeah,
and you're in the middle of something.
I'm sorry. The whole of Nairobi something terrible happened because we couldn't even connect by mobile phone. Apologies for that. So even my team.
Well done. You got back. You were in the middle of answering a question, which I'm afraid I can't quite remember what the question was. But can you remember? Do you want to say more?
Okay, maybe I'll skip that and maybe just mention that I know I've found Nathan saying that he doesn't worry so much about brain drain, but I think we see it ourselves where we are sitting from. We do have cases where, for instance, you have many young researchers who go to study in the North for PhD, and most of them never come back. Or if they come back, they don't stay. They'll move either back to the North or to Southern Africa, and so forth. Sorry, John, I think I got distracted, so I may not also remember where I was with the other response. Thank you.
No, I think that was a really, really useful addition. I mean, I've observed in my life that people from different countries seem to go to the North for different reasons, and in some countries they go back. Indonesians, for example, always retain a very strong relationship with Indonesia, whereas when I was working in Kenya, it seemed to be a much more one-way process. So mind you, that was 30 years ago. It may have changed. So I think it's different in different countries. Well, I think we're up to time. There are more questions, but I think if we're trying to stick to time, I think we should stop now. Just say thank you all very much for answering those questions, and we are going to split into groups, and Marjorie is just explaining how to split into the groups. So click on the link in the chat channel. That'll take you to a web page. In the web page, you'll find other links which will take you into the group you want to be in. And please continue the conversation in the groups. The groups are organized sort of around different, well, as you know from the program, different sets of stakeholders. And the question is, what can whatever the stakeholder is do to improve the ability of local researchers to engage in development policy debates. So I think we have a 10-minute break now, and then so you will see each other again, first of all in the breakout rooms. Follow the link to whichever room you want to, and then at the end of that session, which I think will be about 1:50, so after half an hour in the group, we will find ourselves all back in the plenary, and there'll be instructions about how to do that afterwards as well. So thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much, participants, for all your very stimulating and quite challenging questions, and see you all again soon.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chandra Mandramutu, the Vice Chair of the Board of Governors of the Canadian International Development Research Centre in Canada. First of all, let me say that I'm very pleased to be invited to be the moderator of this last session and to provide some of the takeaway messages that came out of the discussions today. I'm very excited to participate for a variety of reasons. First of all, much of what was talked about earlier in the sessions and by the different panelists actually resonate with the work that we're doing in IDRC, where our focus is to support research in development countries carried out by researchers of the South to influence policy and decision-making in the South. So although we're located in the northern part of the world, our funding goes exclusively to fund researchers, universities, academics, and policymakers in the South. And we have supported think tank initiatives in the South. We've supported research consortia in the South. And therefore, I'm very pleased with much of what has been discussed today. And I certainly take this discussion to heart as we implement our new strategic plan for the next 10 years in IDRC. So I'll start, Marjorie, if you wanted to share the slides, please. Thank you. Now, the essence of the discussion that we've had so far is that the power of and the influence of some of our decision makers rests within in the North. And there's this disconnect and symmetry of resources, lack of a symmetry of resources between the North and the South. And not only between the North and the South, but even within the South-South region, we see disparities in distribution of power, in wealth, and in decision-making and influence of how policies are derived. And that is something that we certainly need to address going forward. It also ties into the fact that much of our resources for funding are located within the North, and this tends to influence the type of research question that is asked, the way that the research question is framed, and the methodology for undertaking that research. However, local researchers have comparative advantages that are not always recognized and respected in terms of the local knowledge that they have, the experience that they can bring to bear on what is called going on in terms of their knowledge that they could bring to bear in the methodological questioning and analysis of the problem and arriving at decisions. So this needs to be recognized of the expertise of our researchers. There's the legacy of colonialism, of course, that affects our research impact. And today we talk a lot about the decolonization of research. We need to put that into action. And how do we decolonize the research question and the approach, the methodological framework in which that research is undertaken? We tend to favor northern researchers, people who are located with a bias towards research in the US, Europe, North America generally. And this does influence how the research problem is actually being tackled. And so that whole aspect of decolonization of the research agenda is something that needs to have much more vigor and force as we go forward. There's the brain drain, obviously, as people from the South move to the North to take up more active career progressive pathways in Northern institutions. But while that is so, it does have an effect of trickling down back or trickling back into their regions in which they originally came from and their countries, because they can make connections with their fellow researchers in their home regions and home countries to help to undertake joint collaborative research that could be of benefit to the Southern communities. There's no one-size-fits-all approach in academia and in policy. So I think it would be a disservice for us to think that we could come up with one framework that would be appropriate for every part of the world in which we work, the developing part in which we work. Certainly what may be true in Asia would be different from Latin America, would be different from Sub-Saharan Africa, would be different from the Middle East and Northern Africa. And so we have to think about how we develop that research agenda, taking those geographical, regional foci into account and the centers of expertise that exist within those different geographical regions and the resources that exist in those regions, or lack of resources, or differences, disparities in resources between different countries in the geographical South. Networks and reputation matters a lot. And this is something that we need to bear in mind, that in terms of gaining impact, we tend to look at judge productivity the same way that we do within the North. However, when we start to think of new methods of assessment and methods of judging impact, we need to look, for example, at what's being done with RQ Plus and use that as a method of assessing impact, not just in the South, but also in the North. Local researchers are excluded at the international level based on special interest group politics that they may not be a part of or may not subscribe to. And this is a discriminatory form of preventing inclusive research from not wanting to have divergent viewpoints being placed at the table. But I think we need to be much more inclusive and respectful of differences of viewpoints, no matter what special interest group politics that may appear. And we see this magnified at the country level, where decision makers and politicians tend to only favor taking advice from groups that they may be personally more in favor of. So while there's certainly room to make some differences and to be able to undertake a new paradigm in research here for the global South, we need to also recognize that there have been some improvements, and these improvements have already been felt in some parts of the world, and we've seen some positive gains. We need to build on those gains as we develop further some of our research agendas in the different parts of the world in which we're involved in social sciences, natural sciences, and health sciences and engineering. Next slide, please. So some of this is a bit of a repeat of what I presented in the previous slide. I wouldn't go through each of them in the same level of detail, but certainly how do we change attitudes of people in the North? How do we get them to recognize different methods of assessment in the South, different ways of evaluating research in the South? How do we encourage more Southern researchers and support them in taking part in policy networks and organizing conferences, international conferences dedicated to problems in their regions and in their countries that could be of international quality that's comparable to anything that's been done in other parts of the world. And also in terms of publications, we've seen, for example, the interest in having versions of nature and science being produced in the regions by regional experts that take on a regional flavor and focus that would be comparable to other top-level scientific journals. So those are the kinds of activities that we should look to promote in terms of conferences and publications and exchanges. And the fact that we need to support work that does not encourage or behind the scenes in a latent way discriminate against the voices of the people in the South in terms of Indigenous people, women, for example, disadvantaged and displaced people. We need to focus much more on giving voice to those parts of civil society in defining the shape of the research agenda. The next slide, please. So I think that's it, right, Marjorie?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, colleagues, and it was certainly a pleasure to participate. I hope I've captured the main points here. And do we now open it up to have comments, Marjorie?
Sorry, I have a problem with my sound. Yes, the idea now is to review the takeaways from the breakout sessions. So we can invite each of the facilitators. We have them on the slides right there. You can see from the first breakout room who discussed practical steps for one particular stakeholder, which is the regional and national governments, to help solve the issue. And it was moderated by Nisha Aruna-Tilake. And we can invite her to elaborate a little bit on her room's discussion and the key takeaways.
Thank you. Please, Nisha, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So we had a good discussion, and some of the ideas were already discussed in the plenary session. So these are the two main ones that came from the breakout session. So one was to just look for successful examples where researchers and policymakers have collaborated well and learn from those examples. So I think that is a good idea because there is little we all think that it doesn't happen too much. So maybe if there are examples of where it has happened, we can see what are the parameters that have helped in that. And the second thing is there is this suggestion that the politicians just rely on a few local researchers because the wider group of researchers do not have visibility. So the idea is to have encourage local networks to have advertise the different types of researchers that are there in the country, and then provide contact details for them so that the politicians are able to reach out to them when there is need. So these were the main two ideas that came.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Nisha. The second breakout group, please. And the moderator is Nazreen. So Nazreen, please discuss the recommendations that came from your group. The floor is yours.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think some of it links to what Anisha's group said, so it's not surprising that some of these are intertwined. We came up with actually 5 recommendations. Sorry, went beyond the 2, but there's lots of excitement about what we can do as local researchers. So there's a suggestion that we should be, or local researchers should be more proactive in convening more strategic networking opportunities for the very reason that Nisha mentioned, is that we need to broaden the relationships that currently exist in country between researchers and decision makers. There should be more activity around celebrating Southern knowledge and expertise. And this goes back to perhaps even building the skills of researchers to know how best to share their research, to do better knowledge translation, even for institutions to have searchable databases of who their expert researchers are in their institutions. There are some universities where you go on their websites and you can't find who their faculty are or who their experts are. And those are simple recommendations that can go a long way. There is also a recommendation that local researchers need to be more proactive about engaging in setting the national research agenda and similarly funding for national research, and that they can play a more advocative role for Northern, in terms of encouraging Northern donors to look at enabling the Southern research ecosystem that goes beyond just individuals, but look at this from a more long-term perspective and how that looks at in terms of funding institutions that can be self-sustaining over time. And then lastly, to recognize that there is a varying power even within the Global South between researchers locally, and to be able to support and recognize other colleagues in the field locally, and to relinquish some of that power of those that may have come from more privileged educational opportunities or networking opportunities to broaden the base locally, and therefore to be each other's advocates in the South and not just rely on the North. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazreen. We'll go to the breakout session on Northern researchers, and Nathan, please.
Great. Yeah. So so we had a fantastic discussion, and I'll just go through quickly. I know we're short on time, about 4 points, which are roughly what's on the slide. So there's a lot of discussion about ethics, and in particular that in lots of Southern countries there isn't a local IRB board, and local views on ethics or ethical considerations aren't taken into account, which is hugely problematic. And so that's one area where we could improve. The other one is in terms of Northerners doing research in developing countries. One is, we really need to have it as an explicit goal, not just the quality of research we produce, but capacity building. So the process that generates that research, and as an outcome, improving the research abilities of enumerators, of managers, bringing them on as co-authors. So just really trying to do what we can to to help researchers in a pedagogical sense, just like we do with our own graduate students in the North. And that's not incentivized, and ideally it would be, and it comes at a cost in terms of efficiency, money, time. But if that's viewed as an important goal, then I think that's a good thing. We had a discussion about local RCTs, and that's the first point there. There's many dimensions to this, but ones that stick out in my mind is, well, let's have the ideas come from local populations, or actually people from not some scholar born and raised in the US that's just coming up with random ideas, but actually the local communities, they are probably going to know best what potential policies and solutions might work. And then also thinking about, what are the benefits of different projects to the local community? Usually we think of as researchers, what are the benefits to my CV, right? And so those things might be very different. And so that's involving local policymakers. And then just the final thing is about conferences and panels. So we need to be more cognizant if there are panels and there's no representation of researchers from the South or the country that the panel is about, or that the paper is about. And so you can imagine a different world where every paper that's written by a Northern scholar, there's a paper on the same topic written by a Southern scholar, or discussants, so there's cross discussants, or every panel has representation. And so I think we just need it's a change in mindset where this has to be the goal and the norm. And when conferences deviate from that, which is right now 100% of the time, we view that as problematic. And so, yeah, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Very illuminating.
Yes, just a quick word to say the next one is the last one, because the two last room merged together for research funders and other stakeholders. So we can move to the next one here.
Thanks, Marjorie. And Andre, you're presenting this.
So we had a good discussion about research funders and what they could do, and we discussed about the importance for funders to use evidence in their decisions, and also the need for evidence of the impact and the funding available to Southern scholars as a good entry point, but also on the other hand discuss how it's important to shift the funding strategies, and we had some discussion about how that could change, and one concrete idea was whether donors can fund national research councils, foundations, and other spaces like that could change the incentives and the power dynamics to ensure that it's local priorities in the agenda. So reflecting a little bit back on some of the other breakout groups. And we had a very rich discussion, but those were some of the unique aspects that came out.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Really appreciate that. I want to also take this opportunity to touch a bit on your last point there about donors funding local or national research councils. And again, to say how pleased we in IDRC have been to collaborate with the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office in funding some of, and UK DFID to fund some of the initiatives of collaboration between the African science granting councils, and IDRC and the UK have played a significant role to provide support there to enable the African granting councils to undertake indigenous local research, and particularly around this time with respect to COVID. So I think your point there is certainly very well is highly valid and very well appreciated and taken into account by some of our donors. So thank you for that. On this note, then, it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues at IDRC, Dr. Aryan Dehan, and he is a senior program specialist at IDRC. And so Aryan, the floor is yours to give us the final words of wisdom, please.
That is a final words of wisdom, Dr. Van der Boten, I might not be prepared for. It's mostly my honor and my pleasure to thank everybody, including yourself. Thank you to all the panelists for being there. I think it was a fantastic discussion. I found the opening panel just frankly amazing. Such a wisdom. It was fantastically diverse, and I really hope that we will continue this conversation. I think it'd be very important to make those recommendations, the findings. So the PEP is doing a lot of research on the Southern research, to make those available, make them very specific. I personally feel it's very important to quantify some of the trends if we want to convince. And as Dr. Matsumoto said, we at IDRC will take this very much to heart. But we also, for example, in the research councils, also want to convince others to fund this. And I think it's very important to document the value of investing in Southern research. I know Southern Voices is doing that. Maybe document some of the trends in funding, because I think my impression is the funding for Southern research, despite those commitments, these are shared commitments, but the funding has probably remained stable where other sources have gone up, and also how that can leverage funding in the South itself, because in the end, as many people said rightly, in the end, it is Southern governments that should be in the lead of funding this research through research councils or directly commissioned research. So it remains very important. We as practitioners understand those cases, but we need to convince others of that case. And again, this is just to say that we had such a fantastic panel, and it's so with great conclusions, very clear as highlighted by Dr. Matsumoto, and it's very important to write this up. The last thing, or almost last thing, I want to say, I'm not going to say we create a hashtag for that, but I think the word decolonization is absolutely important. And the reason I'm saying that is, and with Nasreen, the way Nasreen elaborated on this is about North, South, also within the South, and it's also within the North. Anybody who's followed any of the news in Canada, and I do feel we absolutely need to reflect on this, has seen the incredible tragedy of the discovery of Indigenous children that were killed in Indigenous schools. We also have an internal decolonization issue, and Indigenous communities in Canada are asking us settlers to reflect on that. So that is a very deep process. It's absolutely important. It's absolutely key to this conversation, and I'm so grateful that you have, Andrea mentioned it, everybody mentioned it, Nasreen mentioned it, have reflected on that way. I think that's the key to our commitment to that. So it's with humility that I thank everybody for doing this. It's also with, I'm incredibly grateful for the time you've put into this, all the panelists, all the participants, or the facilitators, and so on. And at IDRC, we continue to just be honored to continue to work with everybody to put forward that case. And I think Jane should actually have the last words. Jane has asked me. Yes, it is only about 10:30 here, so we can't offer a toast yet. My bosses might get upset, but I do, if we were in a normal PEP meeting all together, and I very much look forward to being all together again next year, I would absolutely bring out a toast to all the Southern researchers that on a daily basis commit their time and their efforts to making the world better. So thank you, everybody, and I'd really like, before we close, I do want to pass back to Jane. As you all know Jane. I can't think of a better colleague, a better friend, and harder working person than Jane, the executive director of PEP. And if we could do a round of applause, the last one would definitely be for Jane and all the people working with Jane. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Hope everybody stays well, and hope to see you soon in person.
Thank you very much, Arian. You actually had the last word, but okay, you toast for the Southern researchers, we toast for the fathers, we toast for IDLC, and thank you very much. Thank you to you at Shadra for gracing this occasion. I think I'll just thank everyone and say that as is the tradition with PEP, we'll be sharing the proceedings very soon. Once they are done, we will share the links, and we will definitely continue this conversation going forward. This is not the end, it's just the beginning. Thank you very much for your support. Marjorie, I don't know whether you have a last word. Otherwise, we had left it to Arian to close. Thank you so much.
Yes, one quick last word to thank everybody, our panel, and especially our moderator, John Young, who's put a lot of work in conceptualizing and structuring this discussion, and I'm really grateful. And also a word for Lucas Ronconi, who has helped us gather the takeaways during the panel discussion. So it helped us manage to gather the takeaways in time to share directly today. And as Jane said, we will publish all of the proceedings and takeaways through the PEP channels. I also want to thank Dr. Borat, Dr. Maramutu, Ayan for helping us putting this session together, for your kind words. So on this, I guess we can indeed close today's session. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Marjorie, and everybody, the entire team for making this possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.